Welcome to the Vigor Life Podcast, a source of inspiration, lessons, stories, skill sets, mindsets, and strategies to invigorate and expand all areas of your life. Let's go. Hey, what's going on? Coach Luka back here with the Vigor Life Podcast. And today's episode is going to be, I would say, digging a little bit into one of my favorite subjects, which is coaching. But let's just call it we're going to call this we can call it the 7 questions. We can call it the coaching habit. We can call it the whatever it may be. But my goal here is to make you better, or I would say to help not you, but also other people get more insights, which is really coaching is about, helping people learn, grow, get insights, take action, right? So that become like I said last time, not just thought provoking, but change provoking. I would even say action provoking. And so I've studied a bunch of different things, and I like simple concepts, meaning simple is it's not crazy overwhelming to apply. So what I'm going to share with you today is going to be things that you're going to be able to apply. And, this is directed a little bit more, I would say, towards coaching your team. So if you're in any type of business, let alone just the business of fitness and nutrition, I would say any business, but also this applies as well into just conversations with friends, family, colleagues, clients, like all of it. It's universal, and a lot of this stuff is based in psychology. And so I'm gonna work to keep this certainly not very, very short, but this can go much deeper. I'm going to go in much more detail. And these are the types of things that I actually cover in my business coaching and mentorship program. I'll do full-blown webinars talking about this, going deeper, and helping people, my coaching clients get really good at this and having a framework that they can use. But that's what I'm going to share with you today. And so let's look at it this way. I come from the standpoint of I'm always working on helping myself get more clarity from my team, helping them grow, having them help me grow by getting more understanding and insight. And like I said, this is an ongoing process. It's a forever process. But I would say that at this point in time, I've definitely kind of found a groove, and I'm very, very committed to becoming the best, I would say, leader and coach possible for my team. And with that said, what are some of the things that you kind of let's just say, what are 3 things that you kind of are bottlenecks? Let's just call them bottlenecks, okay? The 3 bottlenecks is, number 1, a lot of times if you're in business and you got a lot of stuff going on and you're leading teams, is overdependence. Overdependence happens when people keep looking to you to do things, and then of course you take on that role, meaning you gotta fix problems, you gotta find solutions, and then everybody's trained to come to you. So obviously that means that there's not enough ownership, there's not enough leadership from or should I say, people taking ownership and leadership of actions based on the values and the mission of the company and things of that nature, right? So, and it just becomes kind of like this cycle that becomes overwhelming, because once again, it's like you got so much on your plate, and then you're getting stuff added on your plate, right? Because everybody's over depending on you. Well, what I'm going to talk about today is going to help people solve their own problems while growing, while getting insight, while getting, I would say, realizations out of it. So that's one of the bottlenecks. What's one of the issues? Number 2 is overwhelm, right? So think about in any situation, organization, business, team, when it's like this vicious cycle, right? Where if you're not focused, you become overwhelmed, right? Because guess what? You don't have clarity. You don't have a narrow path. There's too much of everything. And so that drives overwhelm. But then overwhelm drives the lack of focus. It's almost like sleep and stress, right? And cortisol. It's like you don't sleep enough, you're stressed. When you're stressed, you don't sleep well, and there we go. So that's the second thing. And a lot of these questions and this coaching approach that I'm going to talk about today solves that, because it creates clarity and it creates focus on what should be focused on and what should be done in that scenario. And number 3 is disconnect. And disconnect on 2 parts, disconnect on kind of 2 levels. One is the disconnect from impactful and meaningful work, right? I can't tell you how much of the time, when people are not working on something meaningful or impactful, they become disconnected from their work. Because they become disconnected from their work, guess what? They don't do great work, right? They're not doing deliberate practice and focused work. And that creates an issue. And now you look at an organization, you look at a team, you look at anything. If these are the things that keep popping up, that means that guess what? Like, you're not going to be pushing into the same direction. I put up a post on Instagram yesterday about, birds flying in V formations together and how they become more efficient. And in the Maori, they have, this analogy of same thing of the spear, right? And to create the most impact, you have to push through those 3 points of that triangle of the spear forward. That's the thing is, like, if your team, right, has focus and path and is moving in the same direction, you're pushing that spear. That's how it punches through stuff, right? Same thing as the birds flying in a V formation. They do it because they're 70% more efficient, right? Because of the wind drafts and so on and so forth. And they, if somebody gets tired, they go in the back so that somebody else can push. The whole point of that story is also, once again, if the whole team is connected to that same meaningful work, the impactful work, that mission, that vision, and those values, like, that's how you speed ahead and get more done, better work done, and you're doing it with more enjoyment, right? So that's one part of the disconnect. And the second part of the disconnect is just amongst people, right? When you don't have meaningful conversations, when you don't connect through asking questions and actively listening, there's disconnect between the people. And then when there's more disconnect, there's less trust. When there's less trust and connection and less proximity and all the, and the depth of intensity, people start going further apart. And you know what happens when people start going further apart? No bueno, right? No bueno. So with that said, I'm bringing up, I would say, like, these points of, like, how do you help somebody get an insight? How do you get an insight of when you're having conversations? And so before we move into that, I'm going to touch on a couple of points real quick, because this is a habit, okay? Meaning a habit. Like, watch. So the first three things that I talked about, which is overdependence, overwhelm, and disconnect, like, it all happens from patterns. I mean, like, we're in a pattern, and, like, this was, certainly one of my weakest links that I've managed to fix and make better. Not to say that, it can't be a lot better, is jumping to give advice. Now, as coaches, if you're in fitness, you definitely know this, but in any kind of coaching realm or leader realm, or if you're, managing, what tends to happen when somebody comes up with a questions or with a problem, right? Our tendency is to give advice. I would say in life too, right? When you talk to people, you're just waiting to give advice as soon as you possibly can. And that is the beginning of the problem, right? That's a habit, that's a pattern, right? You want to try to fix the problem. You are the solution, the ego, whatever it may be. But like I said, I think sometimes it goes away from the ego. It's like literally a pattern, right? When somebody comes and asks you a question, you try to solve the problem. You try to look for a solution. Well, here we're going to try to do some other stuff and change some of your patterns. They're going to help you empower people more, for you to do more of the work that you need to do and empower others to do the work that they need to do that's meaningful and impactful. So with that said, let's just touch base on a little bit of, shifting habits. And number one, it's like you have to make a vow, right? Because there's always like this thing about, why would you change something that's as difficult as, we've talked about this in nutrition, right? About having anchors, meaning, what is your anchor? What's the thing that you're really working hard, like what's really meaningful so that you'll even change this, right? Why would you change something as difficult as a habit that you're really like patterned in? Maybe, like I said, like giving advice or something of that nature, if there's not something meaningful attached to it. Now, making a vow to other people tends to be, like, for me, I know that's like, I do really well with committing to other people that I care about. Like, I respect and honor those people, and I care about them and I love them. And because of that, like, if I make a vow to them and I make a commitment to them, I'm going to actually change it. Like Leo Babauta talks about this in The Power of Less, where, he made a commitment to his wife and kids to stop smoking. Like, that was his vow, right? Because it was meaningful, because it it messed with him. He knew it was not a good habit. Obviously, not a great role model habit, right? Something unhealthy is something that didn't help anybody else out, annoyed him, so on and so forth. So he made that vow, and it starts right there, right? Make a meaningful vow to like somebody that you care about, so that you'll actually change this. Number 2 is, figuring out your trigger. This has to be specific, so figuring out your trigger is like what triggers you to do something. So if you guys read, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, right, which is a great book, by the way, is there's always a trigger to something, right? So it may be, Jenny at work asked me to do, another batch of work because she couldn't get her work done. And that was the trigger. I was pissed off. And then right then and there, I reached into my, my drawer and pulled out M&Ms and started munching on them, for instance, right? Or, every time Jess in a meeting brings up XYZ, I start going in and giving advice and so on and so forth, right? This would be a perfect example for what we're actually talking about right now, the coaching questions, okay? So there's a specific trigger, and you got to write it down. Like, what's your vow? What's your specific trigger? And then from there, being short and specific. Now, the questions I'm going to go over are exactly that, because you call it the double S, short and specific. Like, so what is it that you're going to do? And like I said, if you go too deep and it's like this whole big story about what you're going to do, you're never going to do it. It's got to be simple, short, and specific, seriously. And then beyond that, you got to practice deeply. Now, I've talked about deep practice before, but if you've read, I talked about the culture code. Actually, the first book that Dan Quayle wrote was called The Talent Code, and talking about, why are these places in the world where you get so much of this incredible talent, Brazil soccer, Russia tennis, New York, for instance, music, right? Think Juilliard School, and so on and so forth, right? But, what do those people do that make them so incredible? And why do those people out of those places continue to produce so much talent? Well, one of the things is that they practice small chunks of the bigger action, right? So instead of practicing the whole tennis serve, you practice just tossing the ball up and becoming phenomenal at that, right? And then also repetition, deliberate repetition, focused repetition, doing it fast, doing it slow, doing it different in different creative ways under, stress, pressure, strain. And like I said, doing those two, and one, chucking them down and then just making it excellent, right? So those are some of the traits that, like I said, every person that changes a habit and becomes great at something does. And the last one here is planning how to get back on track, meaning like once you're going to fall off, like it's inevitable. It's like the diet, right? Like, once again, I hate even mentioning the diet because like I said last time, the best diet is the one you don't know you're on. But, with that said, it's like, you're going to fall off, but it's like, how are you going to get back on track? And with that, I mean, there's a great book, Making Habits, Breaking Habits, right? It's like, once you fall off and you miss a moment, you miss a day, and that's a given, right? What you need to do is know what to do when it happens, right? So resilient systems build in fail-safes that when something breaks down, the next step to recover is obvious. And I've talked about this in a blog before, where it's like, okay, cool. When this happens, right? Like when you can't go to lunch at this cafe where you have the healthy salad, your favorite salad, and you get an emergency meeting or this and that, what is something that's likely to happen? It's very possible or probable. Like, what are you going to do then, right? Plan B. And I would even go too far as say, like, okay, and if plan B can't happen, then what's going to be plan C? Okay, so with that said, those are the things that you have to build in to, I would say, to change your habit. Because once again, like when I talk about these questions, like it's going to be easy, to go like, oh man, like this is pretty simple. But like you have to, first of all, notice yourself, like what do you do in those scenarios and those patterns? Because you can have all this information, but to change this habit and, shut up and not give advice and ask these questions and, listen, then at that point in time, you'll actually start working on this. Remember, this is what I talked about, repetition. Yeah, this is where you start with it, right? And I would say this too. Most people will, I would say, now that you have the questions, it's like you can ask too many questions at one time. Don't ask more than one question at a time, right? This is so powerful to you'll become so much of a better communicator and so much of create better connections and learn more, right? You're going to get more information and learn more when you ask a question and listen, and then ask another question. And so with that said, right, what's one of this question is called the kickstart question. And so I'm going to, like I said, fly through my notes a little bit here because put it this way, there's quite a bit of information here, but nonetheless, remember that when it comes to coaching, there's two formats before we move into the first question. Okay, so there's either coaching for performance or there's coaching for development. Like this insight actually was really big for me because coaching for performance is basically when you're trying to solve some type of, problem, right? Like you want a solution to something. Like, how do I do this, right? So it's an issue that you're solving the problem, you're solving the issue. Coaching for performance, for development, turns the light on to the person, right? It's like the whole thing, there's a person lighting the fire and there's the fire, right? Coaching for performance is like you're addressing the fire. Coaching for development is you're addressing the person that that created the fire, right? And I would have you consider that, where you have the most growth, and each one has its own place, right? But where you have the most growth and connection and the most value is when you're able to coach for development more, right? When you turn it on the person and address the person. So, there's 3 P's in this model that you can focus on, okay? And we'll kind of go back to, we'll get back to this, but I wanted to share that. And it's either the project, the person, or the pattern, okay? Now, what that means that with any situation, those are the 3 different things that you can focus on. And most of the time, the project and the person, aka the person that they're working with on the project, right? Those are all, I would say, performance coachings. But when it comes to the patterns, see, now those are the patterns of the person. That's when you turn to development. And so with that said, the kickstart question is, what's on your mind, right? What do you think? There's different ways to ask that question, but essentially that's the kickstart question. What are you thinking about? What's on your mind, right? And what does that do? Well, number one, a lot of conversations you have small talk. I know that, and there's such a thing as called building rapport, and it's cool, right? But you want to get to imagine that coaching happens not just in an hour-long strategy session, an hour and a half or whatever. Not it happens in 3 minutes, in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes, right? You coach every day in asking the right questions and getting to an insight and a solution. So, while small talk can be useful in a conversation, it's rarely a bridge that leads to a conversation that matters. Let's be real, right? Small talk is never going to get us to something that actually matters, an action step, an insight, growth, any of that, right? So you don't begin your coaching conversations with an agenda that was perfect a week ago, something that you already talked about, or hey, you want to get to the root of what's happening right now. So that's why that question, what's on your mind, right? It's so powerful because now it puts the process in front of what really matters, right? And so the question, what's on your mind, quickly turns into a real conversation about the thing that matters most right now, right? So I mentioned this before, that coaching for performance focuses on specific problems. Coaching for development focuses on the person dealing with those problems, right? And so think about it this way. You can bring this up literally in a conversation. So whatever that person brings up, okay? So let's look at this, right? Whatever that person brings up in that conversation, I'm actually digging into this note because this is a powerful one. So they say, well, I'm dealing with X, Y, and Z, right? And so with that scenario, when you ask what's on your mind, you might say, the fill in the insert the thing that they're working on, right? So I would say back, okay, so there's 3 different facets that we could look at. The project side, any challenges around the actual content. The people side, any issues that you're having with team members, colleagues, departments, bosses, customers, clients. and patterns. If there's a way you're getting in your own way and not showing up in the best way possible, where should we start? So notice how, like, once they bring something up, they'll choose. They'll be like, well, it's this content. You know what? It's this person. And it doesn't matter which one they pick. It's just a strong start to the conversation. So whenever, and then whenever they're done discussing that, P, you can actually ask about another P. So for instance, hey, if this was a thing, what would the challenge be here for you? So meaning, let's say they brought out, and they brought up the project, right? And they talk about that, and they go over that. And then from there you go, hey, so if a person was a problem in this situation, what would that thing look like? Who would that be? What would that be? Right? Or if it was a pattern. So if it was a pattern on your side that's a bottleneck and stopping you, like, what would that be? So notice that, like, what's on your mind opens up the door for the person to actually say what's on their mind, right? Now, I will say this, that doesn't necessarily mean that whatever's on their mind is the most important thing, right? And that, we'll get to the all question, which is the second one that's going to bring clarity out of it. But notice how now you have a structure. Like, you ask them what's on your mind. That's what's going to come up, because guess what? We are what we give our attention to. So the kickstarted question helps make explicit something that may be influencing the way that, that person works or is thinking about it, whatever, right? It's bringing it up. And then you can even categorize it in a sense of guiding that conversation, whether it's a project, it's a person, or it's a pattern that they're dealing with. And then once again, are you going to do performance coaching? You're going to do development coaching. Then the second question, this is like, I've loved this. So after learning this, like, I use it all the time, but it's the all question, but all as an AWE. And the second question is, and what else? So the first question is, hey, what's on your mind, right? The second question is, and what else? And that question has impact, because the more options can lead to better decisions, and you ask more questions, and it's like you buy yourself time too. But the thing is, like, how many times have, you thought something, and by somebody asking you deeper questions, or like, hey, what else? You start, I know me personally, I speak kind of like my thoughts. So I'm clarifying my thoughts as I go through it. And, when you say what else, they're going to end up keep adding, well, and there's this other thing. And actually, now that I think about it, right, this is the problem, right? So that's what the what else question is so powerful, and actually is going to come into play later on as well. But the first answer is never the only answer, and rarely the best answer, honestly. Better options lead to better decisions, which lead to better outcomes. And when you ask that question, it gets people to talk, to open up more. You also get more insight of what they're thinking about. And so giving wrong advice often feels more comfortable than asking a question. So this is one of the things that I talked about at the beginning, right? So as both we and organizations value clarity and certainty. And so think about that when if somebody says something, you ask them what's on your mind, and they talk. Natural tendencies to do what? Give advice. Oh, well, yeah, you know what? In this situation, you should do this. You should do that. Or have you, done this, that, and the other. But what if you were just like, okay, that's interesting. What else? Right? And boom, you get more answers and more answers and more answers, right? So when you're not entirely sure what's going on and you need a moment to figure things out, the all question buys you extra time as well, too. So instead of like, we talked about how that whole overwhelm and the dependence on you on answering and having a solution, right? Sometimes you may not have enough information. Sometimes you may not have a solution. Sometimes you may not even be better to help them. So what you say, what else? Tell me more, right? And once again, as I'm saying this, think about how you could use this with clients. Think about this, how you could use with your team. Think about this, how you could use this in so many different situations. So use the principles of practicing, deeply to ask and what else with genuine interest and curiosity. And I think this is, kind of like common sense, but nonetheless, I want to bring it up and mention it because people will run this like robotic, okay, cool, this is the next question versus like, what else? And then, leaning in and being intrigued and giving feedback like, okay, yeah, interesting. Awesome. Tell me more. What else? Right? Like, and really listening, actively listening. So you're engaged. Okay. You mentioned this. What else? This is key. Okay. Once somebody says there's nothing else, that's not a bad thing. That's like legitimately means that, success, that you move on to the next question. There's nothing else. And when it's time to move on, the variation, is there anything else, invites closure while producing the same result. So, don't fall victim to the paradox of choice. And when all question generates, 3 to 5 answers, you make great progress because, obviously that question can induce now, like, think about this, right? You said, what's on your mind? And then we dug into like, what else? So we got a slew of things. Maybe it's only one, but maybe it's 5. Maybe it's 5 or 6 different things. And, that can create overwhelm. But hey, that's why we're moving on to the next question. And because, you have progress. You actually got a lot out of them, right? That's great. And remember, the studies also show that follow-up questions promote higher level thinking. So perfect example is like the all question. It deepens understanding and promotes participation. It gets people more involved. And think about it. People want to be heard. So that's a huge key point here. But, okay, we had question 1. Kickstarted question, what's on your mind? Question 2, and what else? And we got everything out. Now, there's number 3, the focus question. What's the real challenge here for you? So if you jump in to tackle a presented problem, typically you're working on the wrong problem. Doing work your team or doesn't want to do or doesn't want to get done. So the challenge that most people present is not the real challenge, right? It's a symptom. It's a secondary issue. It's a ghost of a previous problem or something like that. So that's why the question, what's the real challenge here for you, like, creates focus, right? And so it slows down the rush to action. So you solve the real problem and not the first problem, because think about the tendency of like solving the first problem, but it's not the real challenge and you're trying to solve it, or you're jumping in to solve it, going back to do that work. That's how this focus is lasers in on the real challenge for you, right? So the question also invites analyzing multiple challenges, and it makes it personal instead of appealing to, high level abstract challenges. I think about that, right? Because if somebody said, what's the real challenge here for you? And I just shared 4, I have to focus and analyze and think about which one it is that I really want to deal with and share with you and have you help me fix it. So, if asking what's on your mind reveals many problems, don't focus on one or offer advice. Instead, follow up with the focus question, right? Because you can only coach the person in front of you, right? Don't tolerate gossip about someone else. Ask the challenge question to focus on the relationship, right? So think about this. As far as like, when's the last time that you've done something like that, right? When's the last time that certain things were presented to you and you said, okay, and what else? That's interesting. Tell me more. And what else, right? So now you're getting stuff up. And when did you say, when's the last time that you said, hey, what's the real challenge here for you? Okay. So, and think about this. If listening to high level conversation about us and we, right, instead of me and I, the focus question can bring focus to the person at hand, right? Because it's like, what's the real challenge here for you? Okay. Adding for you to the end of as many questions as possible can make conversations more development than performance oriented, right? Because you're focusing that on them, like what's their challenge, and that's where the development part comes out, and that's what I love about it. And also, like, remember that there is a place for your advice. Okay. However, one of your roles as a leader, manager, coach, whatever it may be in this scenario, is to have answers, right? So it's not just, of course, like we ask questions because a lot of times when you ask questions, people figure stuff out for themselves. But look, you're still, or if you're an expert in something, right? Or if you're the person that, like, there's a place for that. I'm not saying that, but like, why not answer the right question for that right time? And that's what this does. So also the last thing on that is that research shows that adding for you to a question helps people figure out the answers faster and more accurately. So like these questions are all based in I'd say scientific findings in psychology, right? From there, the number 4 question is the foundation question, which is, what do you want? So, and there's many reasons why the what do you want may not be asked or answered clearly, but the illusion of communication has taken place in that matter, right? The illusion that each party knows what the other one wants sets the stage for plenty of frustrating exchanges. That's why this question And it's actually the first time that kind of like that question became like really, really powerful was like in Warrior. Like, hey, what do you want? Right? What do you want out of this? Matters, because guess what? Like, that's how you get a focus point and a target, and you can reverse engineer stuff, right? Like, once our surface requests or tactical outcomes, needs are affection, freedom, participation, creation, identity, protection, recreation, understanding, substance. Understand and express what you want. When we each understand what the other wants, we're in the middle of an interesting and worthwhile conversation, right? Imagine how many conversations happen, and like at the end, you legitimately couldn't answer like what the other person wants. And once again, like maybe you never asked them that, right? And the thing is, that can come off as a little bit of a, like, that doesn't need to come off as an aggressive question, right? What do you want? What do you want to get out of this, right? It can be asked in a non-threatening way, and actually that's how you want to do it in this situation. If you're not sure about a situation and you read it as unsafe and you begin to back away, unable to engage your conscious brain, like that essentially is not knowing what somebody wants, right? So that others engage rather than retreat from you, focus on Terra. So like this is an acronym that pretty much has been very helpful when you do the what you want question. So that you think about how to influence the environment that drives engagement. So T is for tribe. So this is when the brain evaluates whether someone else is on your side or in your opposition. So we talked about this in other podcasts as far as like, if somebody doesn't feel, actually we talked about it in the Culture Code episode, where if somebody doesn't feel like they belong, that creates threat, right? And opposition, essentially, like, hey, are you with me or against me? So that's the T. It stands for tribe. E is for expectation, right? Where the brain evaluates whether what's going to happen next is clear or ambiguous. So when you don't have clarity, right? Once again, then you have anxiety. And if we have expectation, put it this way, threat goes down at least because we know it's out in the open. R is for rank, where the brain evaluates whether someone else is more or less important than you are and its effect on your status, right? So once again, if you're trying to put yourself above somebody, right, that can create an issue. And so all this, the questions of what you want can bring out, like I would say, reduce all of these issues. And the last one is A for autonomy, where the brain evaluates whether you have a choice or not. Remember, and once again, these questions help create that. So remember what Terra stands for, and it's almost like something that you can run through. It's like a filter, right? T is for tribe, E is for expectation, R is for rank, and A is for autonomy. And you can like dig into that, and that's why I said that this is, although I'm digging quite deep into these subjects, you can go way deeper. And the reason why I do full blown, webinars on this for my team, especially my business coaching clients, so they can get a ton of insight. And it helps them even better with the coaching questions. So, your goal is to raise that overall Terra quotient, because that's what it is. It's like an actual number. So the higher that number is, the more I would say comfortable and people feel, and the better conversations you're going to have. Because with asking those questions, you do exactly that, right? Notice, like even leading up to that, like how many of those tribe, expectation, rank, and autonomy you cover with the question. And then you have a miracle question, and this is kind of like a bonus one. This doesn't, like I said, it doesn't go, that's not the foundational question, but the miracle question is, if a miracle happens, how do you know things are better? And it focuses on the end in mind. It's like the foundation question, but a little bit different. So let me run that back a little bit, okay? If a miracle happens, how do you know that things are better? Right? And then this is where a person will say something like, well, I'm going to base it back to like fitness. And it's like, well, when I get up in the morning and I get out of bed to put my socks on, like I don't have any pain in my back. Right? And so you kind of, you get the like what a person wants. I mean, if you're doing it with a team member, it's like, hey, I don't have to worry. If a miracle happens, how do you know things are better? At the end of the month, I pay off all my bills and still have an extra $1,000 in my bank account in savings, right? Perfect example of that. But it's a different way, because remember, just like coaching cues, external, internal coaching cues, right? Sometimes you say something to somebody and it's like, man, snap the hips, pull the kneecaps up into your socket, push the floor away. And you'll notice that like one of the coaching cues sticks better. Well, it's the same thing here with the foundation question. You might say, what do you want? And maybe that's not going to get what you want out of them. But hey, if a miracle happens, how do you know that things are better? Maybe that one's going to spur more of a better response, right? So from there, right? So and this is, like I said, all of these questions, I would say, are very, very powerful. And you might be in a short conversation, you might use only a couple, right? It's not even going through all 7 of them. You might just use a couple to get to, a solution or insight, right? But from there, what do you want? We move to the 5th question, which is the lazy question. The lazy question is like, how can I help? And let's start with this, right? Offering help is not always helpful, right? Because you raise your status and you lower the other person's, whether you mean to or not, right? And I can look back and say how many times I've done that, right? Like trying to help and be like, hey, look, like you don't know anything, but I know all this stuff, and like, so I'm gonna help you out, right? And if you ever definitely dig into something called a drama triangle, right? Because it explains like how we bounce between different roles, right? The victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer. And as a victim, you attract rescuers, right? And have no responsibility to fix anything because you're powerless. Like you're a whiner, like, oh, I need help, like I can't do anything. So you would actually attract rescuers who are always trying to fix stuff. Like, see, I'm the rescuer a lot of the times. Jumping in, trying to solve people's problems, and so noticing which one you are. Persecutor, you have a sense of power and control, but you end up being responsible for everything, and you create victims. So you're a bully, right? So essentially, like think of the boss that's just like power and control, but also doesn't want to let things go. And so you create the victims, right? And as a rescuer, you feel indispensable and morally superior, but people reject your help and you create victims. So you're a meddler, right? So you got to kind of like notice those, right? Because rescuers create victims, even though we want to believe that it's the other way around, but it's not. So the question, how can I help, forces, a teammate, client, colleague, whoever you're talking to make a direct and clear request, and stops you from thinking that you know how to best help. Right? So I'm going to repeat that because it's a big distinction here, right? The question, how can I help, forces the person to make a direct and clear request. And it stops you from thinking that you know how to best help. Right? Big difference between I think this is how I should help versus the person saying like, hey, this is how you can help me, right? So the worst thing that you can do is something that's not so right that is actually useful, but not so wrong that someone tells you to stop. Makes sense? Right? There's so many times, in coaching situations that, you leave and you're like, man, I think that was pretty useful, but you know what I mean? It's not so right that it's useful, but it's not so wrong that the person will tell you to stop. And then that coaching conversation goes nowhere, right? So if you ask, how can I help, or what do you want from me? But remember, what do you want from me can be a little bit aggressive. So if you're asking, hey, what do you want from me? I would preface it with something like, out of curiosity, or just so I know. So out of curiosity, what do you want from me in this situation? Or just so I know, what do you want from me in this situation, right? We'll soften the tone, because let's be real. Like if I'm like, man, what do you want from me? Right? It just sounds aggressive. But it also makes a point, like tonality, the way that you communicate, like how important this is, right? Think about that, right? Like you could even go through these questions and go like, okay, cool. So I'm going to go, hey, what do you want from me? And that person automatically goes like, oh man, that sounds like I'm being a burden, right? So then they'll be like, you know what? I don't want anything, right? Bam, that coaching conversation is over. That opportunity, to improve, for you to get more insight and for that person to get more insight and have a next actionable step is out the window, right? So don't be afraid of the question. You can answer yes, no, provide a counter offer, think about it to buy yourself time, right? But nonetheless, like you're still bringing it up to find out what you want. So asking the lazy question not only makes you more effective, but it gains your respect as well, because essentially you're putting it on them and going like, hey, look, like, you tell me, right? You guide me. And that's going to gain you respect. From there, number six is the strategic question. Now, like, this is powerful because, and you've heard this before, but if the question is, if you're saying yes to this, what are you saying no to? Okay. And I think that in life, we should always think about that regardless. I think that's a great lesson in life, right? You say yes to this, man, you're saying no to something else. And I realized that the painful way, because I was saying yes to a lot of stuff. And then, you know what I was saying no to? My sanity, my rest, my recovery, my sleep, and it kind of, that kind of crushed me, because of the same thing. I was kind of living in that rescuer role. And this helps person clarify, because remember, somebody might say something and then forget about that. Like, man, if they dedicate that time to, well, I'm going to work on this project an extra 2 hours a day. Okay, great. What are you saying no to now? And it's like, shit, I might be saying no to my family and my kids, right? So being busy is not a measure of success, right? And the maxim, work smarter, not harder, sounds good, but it's impossible to act upon, right? So the qualifier, the other thing too is, and I'm at fault for this too, the qualifier strategic is overused, right? How many times have you heard that? Like, this is a strategic step. This is strategic action, right? And Michael Porter defines strategy as the essence of strategy is choosing what not to do. And I like that, right? I always tell people, first figure out what you don't want to do or don't want to be, before you actually figure out what you do want to be. And a yes is nothing without the no that gives it boundaries and forms. And that's why this question is so great. The no of a mission applies to the options that are automatically eliminated by you saying yes, right? So if you say yes, you're automatically eliminating certain things. And the no of commission puts the spotlight on how to create the space and focus, energy, and resources to create the yes, right? Because as soon as you say yes, there's going to be energy and resources, and people are going to have to go towards that yes, right? So let's go back to that model of 3 Ps that we talked about at the beginning, right? The 3 Ps are projects, people, and patterns. And so when somebody says yes, okay, what are the projects, people, and patterns to ensure that you cover all the bases for the no of commission? So this is a great way to have a filter to bring things up, right? So on the project side of things, what are you going to say no to? On the people side of things, what are you going to say no to? Okay? And remember, it's easiest to say no to those that are closest to us and to those who are as distant from us. In between, it's much harder. Say no by saying yes more slowly. Stay curious before committing by questions around urgency and resourcing. And the thing is, in response, the person will either order you to work, have good answers, go find the answers, or find someone else to do the work. Does that make sense? But it's like now once again, you're creating clarity around this. And remember, it's awkward to say no to something because you're actually saying no to someone. And this is why this question is powerful, because it's bringing those things up. So many times people say, yeah, I'll do that, without actually having any implication of what that really takes and who they have to say no to, right? So, the question behind the question is a strategic question. So what will you say no to if you say yes to this, right? And the strategy question helps fight the planning fallacy where we fail at estimating how much time we take to complete something. So it brings that up. And now you're dealing with reality. And see, this is why I love these questions, because now you're actually coaching. It's not some bullshit like feel good, oh man, like, yeah, I gave a suggestion and I gave advice and it said, yo, and they're committed. Because remember, you heard that, they committed to this. Yeah, but there's a lot of stuff behind that, right? Because the prospect theory says that we overvalue things that we have because we don't like loss. So the strategy question focuses on what we're holding on to. And that is very, very, very important, right? And at the last part of this, the last question is the learning question. And I love this, okay? The learning question is, what was most useful for you, okay? And there's many reasons why this question is great. So, people don't learn when you tell them something or even when they do something, but instead when they recall and reflect on what happened. So think about how you could actually use this in anything that you do, like team meetings, like one-on-one meetings, right? And the question, what was most useful to you, creates space for people to have learning moments, right? And we talk about how much it's difficult to absorb knowledge or retain knowledge, right? But when you create learning moments, like, you speed that process up. And so retention increases when we make the time and effort to find an answer, or we create and share our own connections to new ideas. And like, that question allows for space for that to happen, right? So you interrupt the process of forgetting by asking a question, right? So find a way to ask the question in places other than the end of a conversation too. So notice, like, all these questions, like, you can use them in different areas. It's like the what else question, right? So think about, like, we're going to run back just a little bit, but when you ask, what's the real challenge here for you? Whatever they say, you can say, oh, okay, what else? Right? Because now, once again, they're going to give a couple of challenges. And then when you ask the next question, what do you want? Right? They're going to tell you that. And what else? Notice, what else is like the magic question after anything. Just know that the learning question frames what just happened as something that was useful and creates a moment in which to figure out what it was. Right? So remember that, just the fact that you stated as useful, right now, that frame is there that, hey, this was a useful conversation with, my manager, my boss, my teammate, whatever, my client, my coach. So it has the person focus on one or two key takeaways from that conversation, and that's where they're going to learn. That's where they're going to grow. That's where they're going to get insights. Suffixing the question with "for you" makes it personal. Like we talked about this before. People are telling themselves that was useful, which sounds like better advice. Right? Think about that, right? Like if you came from a conversation and somebody said, hey, how did that meeting go? Oh man, it was useful. Like this is what I got from it. Right? But that's important. Like that's important that the person believes that it was a useful conversation. Now, of course, and of course it was, because part of that is the frame. Like they're going to learn from that, right? The answer to the question not only provides guidance on what to do next time, but reassures you that you're being useful. Right? It's a reassurance for you that as a coach, as a leader, as a mentor, that you're being useful, right? So, and finally, the question prompts insight instead of eliciting judgment. It reminds people how useful you are to them, right? Because there's a lot of scenarios where the conversation happens and a person doesn't leave like, hey, that was useful. But that's how it should be, right? Or that's what I'd have you consider that's what you're shooting for, right? So, and if you guys have read The Power of Moments from Chip and Dan Heath, and this is even before that, if you guys have heard of the peak end rule, it says that how we evaluate an experience is disproportionately influenced by its peak and its ending moments. I've talked about studies before about like how certain things end, colonoscopies or a visit a gynecologist is like they made a 1 or 2 minute difference of how it ended, and it made the person experience it so much better. So, the question of what was the most useful for you, it ends in a kind of like with the peak end rule, where they have an insight and a learning moment at the end, right? And that's what they remember most. Because remember, you remember the peak of a experience or like a travel moment or a meeting or whatever, and the end. So that could be a bad, like the peak could have been a bad thing, right? You remember the worst thing about it, the kind of like the best or the worst thing about it, and the end. So here you have an opportunity to say, what was useful for you. You have an opportunity to kind of play that peak end rule where, because that was an ending moment, and the ending moment ended in something useful, in an insight and a learning moment, right? And they walk away from that. So with that said, right, those are the 7 questions. I strongly encourage you to use them, and use them. What I mean, what we talked about at the beginning, like making a vow and a commitment to somebody else, like finding the trigger, making it specific and simple, like, deliberately practicing it, and also preparing for, and if this, then that type of scenario, right? So like this has to, like, you have to practice this. So yeah, there's 7 questions, but this next time around, after you listen to this podcast, hey, maybe the conversation that you have with a team member, with a client, whatever, you start using that. And maybe they come to you and they're frustrated, and you start, hey, what's on your mind? And then you listen, right? The number one question, the Kickstarter question, what's on your mind? The number two question is the awe question. And what else? And remember, you can use the and what else question in anything else, and it's very, very powerful. Number three, the focus question is, what's the real challenge here for you? And remember that you can also always follow that up with, and what else? Number four is the foundation question. What do you want? Number five is the lazy question. So how can I help? Right? What do you want from me? Remember, if you say, what do you want from me? You want to be like, hey, I'm curious, just to understand better. What do you want from me? Number six is the strategic question. If you're saying yes to this, what are you saying no to? And the last question is, what was the most useful for you? Right? So those 7 questions are massively powerful, but start using them. And, don't like, the other thing about this is too, like I said, there's a lot of depth behind this, which is why I like to dig deep into these subjects and figure out all the whys and the associated questions and thought processes. And, I brought things up like the terror quotient. Well, you don't have to overthink it, because even just asking those questions, like starting today, having the next conversation, is going to blow your mind by just like seeing that you get a lot more insight, a lot more information, a lot more clarity. And so does the person that you're asking them. And with that, you're already improving your coaching. Right. And that's the whole key. The whole key is not to be perfect. The whole key is not to know everything. The key is to get better. And if you start asking these questions, not even all of them, but maybe just a couple in the right scenario, starting today, it means that you're focusing on becoming a better coach, and you're focusing on helping people break through. Right. And so, at the end, what does that do? Right. We talk about things like autonomy and clarity and, how these things help like so much. But if you look at a team and you're constantly coaching them up through this process, and they get more clear on what their, what the challenge is for them, and you get very, very focused and find the right target. And then at the right point in time, you give advice and they're empowered to go do it. Like, this is how your business moves forward faster. This is how your organization, your team grows. This is how everybody else succeeds faster, and it helps also you succeed faster. Same thing with clients. Same thing with, like I said, if it's in the fitness or nutrition realm, whatever else it may be. Like, this is how you move forward faster. Because otherwise, like I said, there's overdependence, there's overwhelm, and there's lack of focus. There's all of these different things and no clarity, and there's no connection to the work or to you. And that never wins. Like, I believe that these are, the kind of the roots, the foundations of, having successful teams, organizations, coaching relationships, and being able to help the other person more. Because remember, like Zig Ziglar said, we bring it back to that, right? The more you help others get what they want, the more you get what you want. And this is part of the process of helping other people get what they want. But guess what? You got to bring that stuff out. And a lot of people don't know how to do that. So you're the person that helps them do that, and you become useful, just like the last question essentially implies. With that said, guys, like, I've been picking up the podcast a little bit and just sharing more of what I'm learning, what I'm using, some of my insights, and hopefully these help you out. As always, please go to iTunes, give it a review. Always appreciate those. Share this. Like I said, if it's helped you, it can help other people, and that's my goal. My goal is to really, really, help other people become better coaches, better leaders, change their life, change your body. As you know, the Vigor Life podcast, I said this is insights to upgrade your life. And so with that said, love and appreciate you. I'll see you in the next episode of Vigor Life podcast. Peace.